the easy one. Well, Jim, so I don't know how well these guys know you, but
Yeah.
like early on, okay, so you started in comic books writing back when you were
14.
13.
13. And the early days you were writing Legion of Superheroes, right?
I wrote all the Superman titles, Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes, Superman, Superboy in his own title, Supergirl, Jimmy Olsen. The only thing I didn't do was Lois Lane, and that was just by accident.
So back in those days, was there one you preferred over the others? I mean, Superman, of course, is the big dog on the street, but was there one of those that you preferred more?
I guess my regular monthly title was Legion of Superheroes. I did that every month. I think for 5 years I did all but 4 issues. And the reason I didn't do those is because the editor wanted to do them himself. So he's the boss. So so I did that. I got to know those characters really well, and it was a unique situation because they were young superheroes, okay? And I was in high school.
Right.
And I'd say, at least for DC Comics in those days, the audience tended to be my age. So we all grew up together. Nothing like that is ever going to happen again. That's, one of a kind.
Time's
So
a very different thing now.
yeah, and the audience has changed. It's a whole different thing now. But that was a kind of unique thing about it, and it was really it made it special to me.
So when you were writing back then, did you ever think in your head, I'm writing these stories for other kids just like me? Was that something you actually thought about? I mean, years later, sure, but when you were that age, do you remember thinking that ever?
Well, Mort Weisinger, the editor that I worked for, he kept telling me that that people who read comics were 6 to 8 years old, and that anyone older than that who read comics had some kind of brain damage. And I always thought, well, how does that explain the fact that I like comics? And all right, I'm brain damaged, I guess. I don't know. But yeah, I figured there were a number of people my age who read comics, and also I didn't, I mean, I was in high school. I didn't know all about writing. I wasn't some seasoned professional, and so when it came to like creating the characterization for these different characters. I just started borrowing my high school friends' personalities, and I hope no one would catch me because I didn't think that was right. But it turns out that's what all writers do: is they pick and choose little bits of people and make them up. So anyway, I had an awareness of the age thing. Let's put it that way. But that wasn't the main thing. The main thing was I just liked doing the work, because I would not only write the stories, I would draw every panel crudely because I was a kid, but just lay it out so that the artist knew what I wanted for the picture to be, and they liked that. The artists liked that. It made their work easier, and even if what I did wasn't right, sometimes if you do something that isn't right, then people can look at it and say, oh no, this should be over here, stuff like that. And so that was good, and I also designed all the covers. I just did this because I didn't know how to do it. When I first sent in my first story, I just made it look as much like a comic book as I could, because I didn't know what a script looked like, or I didn't know there was a script. And anyway, they liked all that, and they told me keep doing it that way. Even once I saw what a script looked like, I still did the layouts and everything, and the artists liked that. And I actually loved it, because I do these little drawings, and then the artists would draw these wonderful pictures that were like the pictures that were in my mind that I couldn't make come out of my hands.
Right.
So I worked with Neil Adams for a while doing covers that way, and we really kind of hit it off, and he liked my sketches, and I loved what he did with them. So. Anyway.
In that time frame, what was one of your favorite artists to work with?
Well, Neil on covers. I worked with Kurt Swan. It was one of the all-time greats. I worked with Gil Kane and Wally Wood. A lot of great inkers: George Klein, Jack Abel. I worked with Al Plastino. He was great. Win Mortimer. Gee, I don't know. I'd have to say working with Wally Wood was something wonderful. I was asked to create a comic book called Captain Action, which was based on a toy. It might have been, I'm not an expert on this, but it might have been the first comic book based on a toy. It might have been. Or it was certainly one of the early ones. And so I was stuck with a lot of stuff from the toy, and also some things that the editor told me he wanted. But I did the job the best I could, and I did it the usual way. I designed the cover, and I did little layouts for every panel. And Wally Wood, great artist, great art penciler, great inker, he knocked it out of the park. I mean, he took what I did and just made it look great. And the funny thing about it is that was the first time I ever got a credit, because in those days DC Comics did not give you credit on the splash page, like all companies do now. And if an artist were to say sign his name on the splash page, they'd white it out, because as the editor would tell you, it's not about you, it's about Superman, or it's about, And so Wally Wood, however, was the only guy that he would letter in, art by Wood in that old English script he used to use, and they left him alone. They didn't mess with him. And if you've heard rumors of him having a .38 in a shoulder holster, well, I'm not going to confirm or deny. But, and for some reason they didn't mess with him. I think it's just probably because he was one of the all-time greats and you don't mess with him. Anyway, because I did, Wally Wood hated artists, art directors. He hated editors. He hated writers especially. And however, because I did the little layouts, I wasn't a writer. I was an artist. And so he put my name.
That's awesome.
Story by Shooter, I think, and then art by Wood. But that was the first time I ever got a credit. And that was kind of cool. So that's special to me. But the whole thing was like, I couldn't believe what was happening. It was all, kind of magical.
Did you feel kind of like you were a superhero yourself? You had an alter ego as a kid? Because being 14, that had to have felt pretty cool, just walking into your school knowing I do this for a job.
It had its ups and downs. I mean, first of all, in those days, I think a lot of kids, Mort was right about at least DC Comics. I don't think a lot of kids who were in their teens or in college were big comics fans. I think there weren't that many. So I didn't get a lot of attention for that. I loved doing it. Sometimes I'd be sitting there in class doing my drawings or something, and the teacher would be mad at me because I was making more money than she was. But I'd done the homework, and I was able to answer the questions, so I got away with it. But anyway, so yeah, it was cool, but not kind of for that reason. I was never a big man on campus or anything like that. Nobody really cared that much about it. It was all right. I'll grant you this. On a slow news day in the city of Pittsburgh, I lived in the suburbs. If they didn't have any news, they'd come out and interview the kid who did comics. So I was like on the news a lot. That was kind of cool. So I got some attention. I'm not saying I didn't. And I also got to fly up to New York and work in the office every once in a while, and it just it was a different life than most people were having. So yeah, it had its ups and downs.
How did your parents respond to working so much so young?
Well, family needed the money.
Oh, right.
So, my mother was very happy to get those checks. And I don't know, it wasn't like, nobody thought anything of it. It was just like, instead of working down at the dry cleaner, I had this other job, It wasn't like it was, I already told you what was special about it. I mean, the rest of it was just sitting there and grinding it out. Every night you come home from school, you go to school all day, and then you come home and work all evening. So, you know, there were times I'd rather go out with the other kids and play basketball, but so you had certain downsides, like, you know, it did take a big chunk out of your life, but it was, I mean, I would never have changed it for anything. It was great.
And later on, you got to be the guy in charge.
Yep.
At Marvel.
Yep. It was unusual circumstances. While I was at DC, Mort Weisinger was famously, don't just believe me, Mort Weisinger was famously kind of hard on everybody. It was kind of a mean guy, and he would, you know, tell you at the top of his lungs what a moron you were all the time. So you know, I had a regular scheduled phone call every Thursday night right after the Batman TV show, and you know, and he'd also call me whenever else he needed to call me, but so he'd call me up and we'd go over whatever I'd sent him that week, and you know, it was like, you know, blah blah blah. Why can't you blankety blank spell, and what's this supposed to be, and you know. So anyway, but he taught me a lot. You know, it was a tough way to learn, but he taught me a lot. And then when I would go on these trips to New York to the office, the first one I had to take my mother with me because I was only 14. It's kind of embarrassing having to take your mother with you on a business trip. But, you know, after that I went on my own. And so I'd go into the office and go over stories and stuff like that. But then Mort would sit me down with like Jack Adler, who would teach me in-house production, or also Jack Adler would teach me printing production. And I'm thinking, why do I need to know this, you know? And then Mort would lecture me about marketing and licensing. Mort was very much involved in things like getting Superman on Broadway and you know, on television and stuff like that. And he talked to me about that all the time, and sit me down with George Klein to learn more about inking, sit me down with Tatjana Wood to learn about coloring, and just sort of the whole business and the business of the business. And I used to wonder, what's going on here, you know? Years later, after I was out of there and Mort was retired, Mort's assistant at the time was E. Nelson Bridwell. He told me that Mort was training me to have a job like his. Okay. Wow. The moron? What for? Why? But apparently he, you know, that was Mort's usual MO, was just to tell everybody they stunk, so they didn't ask for a raise. But I guess he thought that I had some potential to do that sort of thing. So it didn't work out that I ended up at DC. I ended up actually going over and doing some work for Marvel, and then was hired there as associate editor. And I worked for 2 years as associate editor. That was 1976 through 78. And then on January 78, I started as editor-in-chief. And guess what? All that stuff that Mort taught me came back. And it was real handy to be able to talk to the printer and use the right words, and you know, and talk to the production department people, and you know, it was that all that stuff came back, and also to sit in the business meetings upstairs and have a clue what they were talking about, and so you know, that all was, I was prepared for it by circuitous paths, but I was prepared for it. And that helped me a tremendous amount, and I did the best I could. You know, I always tried to do the best I could, and comics were dying in the mid to late 70s, and with a lot of help from a lot of people, we, meaning Marvel and some other companies, turned it around, and I think part of it was because of things that we did at Marvel, and I used the word we advisedly. It took a lot of people to help, but changed the things for the better for creators. People started having benefits and making money, and royalties, and you know, participations in characters you create, participations in titles you create. And so the more people made money, the more people said, hey, you can make money at Marvel, and they started showing up, and then you had better people, and then you'd make more money, and whenever we sold more books, I had more money to play with. So I would, try something new. And then, of course, DC, well, they're not going to let that stand. They're going to try to compete, and they're, trying to outbid us for Frank Miller and for whoever. And and then all these other little the direct market started to surge, and all these little companies started up because now there was a place that you could sell books that didn't involve the extremely corrupt newsstand distribution system, which would too long a story to tell. But by opening up the direct market, helping to open up the direct market, Marvel and then DC and others also created a venue for all these little publishers. And it got to the point with about 8,000 comic book shops. And so if you were a little publisher and you published your little black and white book and sold it for $2 or $3 or whatever, well, guess what? Almost every comic book shop's going to buy one. You're making a lot of money right on your first issue. And, why would every comic book shop buy one? Because it might be the next Ninja Turtles. You don't know. It could be. Take a shot. Buy one book, So a lot of guys started off and started to prosper. And we tried to help them. People would say, well, why are you helping First Comics get started? And I said, look, if if on a level playing field, we can't win against any of these guys, then we don't deserve it. So when Rick Obadiah came first to license property to us, he had the rights to Warp, which was co-created by Neil Adams. And then he got interested in how the whole direct market thing. And I sat him down and explained it to him for 3 days, And then he went off and started First Comics. Same with the Pacific Comics guys. The Shanis brothers showed up in my office, and they said they were a distributor already. They wanted to start publishing. I said, okay, let me tell you how. And actually that started at Marvel and it went all the way up to Image Comics, because when the Image Comics guys left Marvel, Valiant Comics, my next company, we were already in business. And so these Image guys, brilliant artists. One of them, I can't remember which one of them called me up one day. I'm sitting there at my little desk, and called me up, and he said, Jim, how do you get lettering done? Because they'd never had to do that before. They'd never had, other people worried about that. So I gave him some names and told him some stuff, and then he's asking me other questions. And so finally I answered some questions, and then I put him on the phone with my production manager, J.J. Jackson. And she, made sure that he knew who to call at the printer and all the technical stuff they needed to know. And they took that and ran with it. I'll tell you, they made some fantastic money for a while. But I mean, we always figured that. We helped a Milestone get started too. Same group of crazy people, went over there and showed them what they needed to know. But I think that's, the whole direct market, the rising tide lifted all the boats. The more little boats were in the water, they were like our farm club. They would, guys would start out there, they'd get hot, then they'd want to do Spider-Man or whatever. Fine. We never worried about, if DC took somebody, because there were lots more. And just we always knew we could find more. And we used to say we grow them in a vat. Anyway, I don't know how I got off on that tangent, but all right.
That was a good tangent. You seem like you have a lot of people that have been in the business of movies or comics or whatever. They get jaded.
Oh, well, not me.
And you don't seem like you've gotten jaded. You seem like you still are interested in the world, and so I just was curious, what's kind of one of your more surreal moments where you thought, wow, this is really amazing. What I get to do is amazing.
Wow, there's too many surreal moments. I don't know. It's at one time I was at Stanley's house out in L.A., in Hollywood Hills, and the two of us were having exactly that conversation, just about like, you start out scratching out a living doing writing comics or something like that. And here we are years later. He was Stan Lee, and but I was at least me. I was somewhere, and it's exactly the answer to that question is so many things happened, and if I started on a list, I mean, there's just I don't know, entirely too many. I mean, I'll give you two. I'll say two right off the top of my head. I got to meet. Let's see, what's her name? Oh God, I'm losing my memory. All right, I met Mark Hamill at one point, and so I'm in New York. I lived in Manhattan. I was walking down the street, and I hear this guy calling, Jim, and I look around. There's some weird-looking guy with a beard running at me, and he comes running up to me. I'm like, who the hell are you? Are you armed? And he said, it's me. It's Mark Hamill. And he had a beard for some part in some play he was playing. And I didn't recognize him right off the bat because his hair was the wrong color and everything. And but I mean, Mark Hamill chasing me down the street will live forever in my mind as a weird moment. And I don't know. There's lots of other ones. I can't think of them.
It's got to feel pretty cool just to be a pillar in so many pop culture moments. I mean, really, you're a big part of pop culture that continues today. So that has to at least, make you think, hey, that's.
Yeah, well, I was glad to be a part of it. I mean, there were so many people who, you say I care about it, you're right. And there's so many people I met along the way who cared about it and poured their hearts into it. And then there were some people who just, just skimmed the top and, just were in it for whatever, make some money or for reasons that didn't have to do with entertaining other people, had to do with entertaining themselves, I guess. But not me. I mean, I guess I got taught early on by that guy who yelled at me all the time that you're a professional and you have a responsibility to your audience, to your coworkers, to your company, to everybody, and you should act like a professional. When I was at DC, I mean, if you were late on something, that was just the kiss of death. I mean, you cannot be late. You deliver, and I did. And when I went to Marvel, everything was late. I mean, there was a period from in the 70s where they kept doing these. You'd open a comic book and it would say, "Oops, the dreaded deadline doom. We have to have a reprint this issue because so and so didn't deliver." Or else the book just wouldn't show up, or whatever, and it was ridiculous. Or you'd have these rush job fill-ins put together by, kind of third string guys, when you're expecting like Steve Englehart and George Perez, and so when I came in, I said, well, "That's going to stop. I'll tell you that." When I sat down at that desk the first day, there was comics on my desk, the art boards and the coloring, that hadn't yet gone off to the separator. These comics should have been on sale 4 months earlier. That means technically they're 6 months late. 6 months. And so I'm like, this has got to change. So and in that month of January 1978, Marvel was supposed to ship 45 color comics. We shipped 26.
And what's causing this delay?
It's the artists and writers who just don't deliver, and it's people who just don't show up. It's people who didn't care, people who didn't feel that obligation to the writer or to the audience, to people who didn't understand. You have a contract with those people. They show up to buy that book. It better be there. Anyway, it took me till April to be shipping the correct number of books in April. By the end of that year, we were on time. And P.S., we stayed on time for 10 years. Every book shipped in the month it was supposed to ship. I'll grant you, sometimes the book was supposed to ship in the first week and it kind of fell back to the third week. But it shipped in the correct month every time. So things like a one-shot thing like a graphic novel or things like that, I didn't care so much about. If that came out a little bit later, it wasn't a series where you are promised the July issue in July. One-shots I wasn't quite as worried about it. They usually came out on time too, but every once in a while one of those would slip back a month or something. That didn't worry me. But I felt like that was the kind of thing that's the difference between understanding that you're in a position of responsibility and honor, and you can't just dabble at it. You have to be a professional, and the best guys, the guys who were, the all-time greats, they always were. Wally Wood delivered on time. Gil Kane delivered on time. Everybody, all the great guys, they honored their commitments and they got it done. That's how I want to be. Now there are some superstar guys, I'll grant you, who take the job with the understanding, I'll get it done when I can get it done. And I think sometimes companies will foolishly announce it too soon. Or they say, oh, we got the first issue. The second one will be here any minute, no. But, so that happens these days, I guess. But I think a lot of times it's just the artists and writers, they become artistes. They get their hands stapled to their forehead, and they'll deliver it when they damn well please. So, anyway.
Were there any, writers or artists that you let slip by your editorial, process?
No, well, no. I mean, basically, I try to make the rules the same for everyone. Which occasionally there'd be some guy with a big ego, and it would piss him off, because he'd say, "Well, but I am so and so." Well, I don't care who they. So, yeah, I'm the guy that signs a check. No. Anyway, so no, I didn't do that. There were times, for instance, what I tried to do is I tried to use what I'd learned from the great people I'd worked with. And by the way, when I was associate editor for those 2 years, I was writing the Spider-Man newspaper strip with Stan. So I worked with this guy every day, right? I'd write the story. I would do my little layouts. John Romita would draw the strip from my little layouts, and Stan would write the dialogue, and that's how we worked. So I'm talking to Stan every day. Also, when I was associate editor, for most of that time, Archie Goodwin was the editor-in-chief. And I'm telling you, the books were not great then. It wasn't Archie's fault, but the books were not great, and everything was late. And Archie, on one hand, he knew some of the stuff wasn't even fit to publish. On the other hand, he didn't. If he kept it back and did corrections, it'd be even later. And so he always used to tell me, he said, "There's always going to be, a few good things and a bunch of bad things, and there's nothing we can do about it." And I said, "Yes, we can, But Archie, he's probably the greatest creator this business has ever known. He's probably, if you ask people in worldwide, if you asked Jean Giraud and say, who's your favorite writer? Archie Goodwin, right? No hesitation. So, but as a bureaucrat, he didn't have my bureaucratic skills.